Okay, welcome back. Page 158, talking about cost versus cost avoidance. It could be one of those pay me now or pay me later kind of a thing. And when you pay me later, it's going to be double, triple, or 100 times the cost. Some sort of a cost-benefit analysis. So benefit would be often expressed as like an annualized loss expectancy, an ALE. The asset valuation, how'd you come up with that? Well, what was the acquisition cost? What's the maintenance? What's the replacement? Who are the owners? And what kind of intellectual property? Adversaries, loss of productivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, loss of revenue. So how do you put the valuation on exposure to your Social Security number? Well, to the company, it's most likely going to be, I have an attractive thing, what would be called an attractive nuisance. Which means I'm going to generate an awful lot of people trying to get in, and then I'm going to get sued. I'm going to be exposed to lawsuits, or I might have a loss of reputation or loss of, so it's very complicated on coming up with asset valuation. They have this goofy math thing in there talking about a single loss expectancy times the value, annualized rate of occurrence, how often is it going to happen? Again, I'm not really keen on the math part, but let me just go through one more time. If I had a 10% chance of something occurring, and then if it did occur, I have a 20% chance of something else occurring. All right, so what's the overall chance of the second thing? All right, 10% chance of them trying to break in, and a 20% chance of them succeeding. So what is my overall percent chance? Well, it's 10% of 20. You multiply them together. So that's 2%. That's what I'm trying to get you to understand is risk multiplication. I'm not interested in the formulas that they got in the book. All right, making sense? All right. So let's talk about a super duper extreme thing. Let's say that the likelihood of an asteroid striking the Earth is incredibly small, right? A tiny, 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 tiny number. I'm making these numbers up. 0.0001%. Okay, I made that up. But if it's a big asteroid, let's say it's 30 miles across, most likely it's going to kill 7.8 billion people. So now the number, even though the first number was really, really tiny, if the other number is really, 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 really big, well, then that's an unacceptable risk. Okay, on page 164, they talk about alternative technologies. The first one is active, operationally critical threat and asset and vulnerability evaluation. And it's the same thing we've talked about before, asset-based profiles, and then vulnerabilities, and then develop your strategies and your plans. It's not really that much different. There's one called fair factor analysis, and it's more like a hierarchy. Like there's a risk, but what kind of risk is it? Is a loss frequency, and what is it? It's like an entire taxonomy of the different factors involved. ISO, there's a bunch of the ISO ones. This is ISO 27005. You've seen this before, where the communication efforts kind of go up, and the monitoring review, all that stuff is involved to make sure that, these components actually work. So NIST, of course, has a bunch of these things too. They start with an organization-wide risk management approach, making sure that, the organization is the one involved, and the mission and the business, and then the information systems. And so, you can't just do bits and pieces of it. And then their risk management framework. Okay. And again, it's, categorize, select, implement, etc. Monitor, because it's always important that you go through back and make sure everything is working. So bottom line is, selecting the best model, whatever suits your fancy, check them out, see which ones you like, see which ones are free. And then, maybe hire a consultant to come in or just learn or steal from others, getting good examples and go after those. Okay, we've made it to the end of this chapter, and I'll see you guys again in the next chapter.